being on Wall Street, New York is, New York is quite a environment that fosters just deals. I mean, you walk down the street and from the hot dog vendors to the newspaper stands to the, proverbial use of Wall Street, there's just deals everywhere, right? And so being around these masters of the universe, which I was very fortunate to be around, my wrestling coach growing up, and I was a shitty wrestler, but his cousin or proverbial, Italian cousin was the head of this major bank. And he was my original investor, as I mentioned, in my first entertainment business. I kind of got to sit in the rooms and be a fly on the wall for a lot of things. And, as it wasn't a formal process, it was really sitting in rooms with people much smarter than me, much more experienced than me. And they started to, talk about Texas and being in New York. New York real estate investors, kind of typically they invest in New York. Like it's a very, there's a very niche group of people there. And once Texas started to come up, I became the Texas person. And being that I'm pretty sure Texas is a pretty big state, but being in those rooms, nobody really knew anybody from Texas. So it turned into, oh, ask Ari. Like, well, what the fuck do I know about? I don't know. First of all, I don't really know anything about real estate. Being an attorney, I'm one of those nerds that actually reads the documents and actually like reads the fine print. And being a admittedly voracious reader, I started to just read these documents and read the investment perspectives. And I became this Texas person in the room where any deal that started to pop up in Texas, 12, 13 years ago, it ended up on my desk. And there's a deal in downtown Dallas that used to be KPMG's global headquarters. The address is 77 North Harwood. I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. KPMG was moving to another location within downtown, and it posed the opportunity for a massive, massive discount to replacement cost to buy an office building. And now, office has become the, redheaded stepchild of business, which I disagree with long term, which is another discussion. And the sponsors had looked at the deal and said, look, if we have this massive vacancy, what if we can sign, a bunch of new leases before we closed? Could there be a way to create terminal value before we even bought the property? So in hearing the discussions and watching, some of the corporate relocation and some of the leases they started to sign, I just kind of picked up the phone and started calling a couple friends back home who knew Dallas, a couple doctors and lawyers and, people. My father's an attorney. He had a couple of his buddies and, my childhood friend who's our chief of staff. We've been in business together since we were 10 years old on the basketball court, selling baseball cards and airheads and blow pops. And it's just, more commas, more zeros now. But we started just talking to some folks, and I found myself telling this story with a level of excitement and exuberance of what I was experiencing, not really thinking we're going to start the business. And people started to say, okay. And they started to say, okay, and started to say, okay. And in a happenstance meeting, Major kind of said to me, well, I guess we could call it Rastegar Capital. And I thought to myself, well, we're not going to own or operate. Like, we could put some money together. And over the course of 4, 5, 6 phone calls, traveling back to Dallas and having a couple, nonchalant meetings, $1.8 million, which to me might have been $100 billion at the time, turned into, hey, I'd do that. Hey, I'd do that. So we structured our own LLC, RC 717 North Harwood 1, and pooled the capital together into a special purpose vehicle. And I used some limited partnership agreements that I'd seen in my core business and copied and pasted them and, restructured a deal. And I made the deal very simple. I said, look, we'll charge no fees on the front end, 0. We're going to charge no management fee, 7% preferred return. And after the 7, you get your money back. You get your 7, we split the profits 50-50. That's my deal. So meaning if it didn't work, and even if there was only a 7 that came out of it, we'd make nothing. But if we were right, we would do well. And we wired the first 1.8 million from that special purpose vehicle into the, into the operations business with another sponsor. And they bought us out a year later. and at a pretty significant return, and the rest was history. I think the purchase price was like 70 million, and I had like a couple million of equity. But there was some massive institutional investors financed by a huge group on Wall Street. No, it was a very institutional deal that our investors, that were the doctors and lawyers of the world, had no business being in, first of all, because they don't have the money for it. And we found that competitive niche of saying, and we do it to this day, it's like we'll buy these bigger institutional deals, we'll anchor them with public pension funds or massive operators financed by the CIBCs of the world or Greystone or these, unbelievable groups, and we'll parcel off a co-investment component. And that's really been the business is, the smaller investors don't get a part of the kind of the rich people deals historically. That's just not what happens. They're usually, stuck doing some, less than institutional grade type project. But we fell into our thesis was institutional grade deals pairing with big institutions. And at the time, we didn't have institutional investors because we didn't have, our audited track record. We didn't have audited financials. We didn't have our third-party admin set up. But as we started to set them up and garner, the vast majority of our money being institutional, we went back to that thesis. So at the beginning, they had the institutions, they were signing on the debt, they were the operators, and we were the small little mom and pop. And then as time went on, we became the institution, we became the operator, and we still were able to have this kind of co-invest thesis of allowing smaller investors into institutional grade deals.